Maria Sklodowska, later known as Marie Curie, was a Polish and naturalized French physicist and chemist, famous for her work on radioactivity. She was the first woman to win a Nobel Prize in physics and in chemistry, and became the first person to claim Nobel honors twice. She is one of the brightest and most inspiring people who pushed the borders of the existing science and a role model for women. Marie was born on November 7, 1867 in Warsaw, Congress Kingdom of Poland. Her both parents were teachers. Her dad taught math and physics, and her mom was headmistress at a girls' school. She was the youngest of the 5 children, and growing up as a child of 2 teachers, she was taught to read and write early in her childhood. As Marie grew older, her family came upon tough times. Poland was under the control of Russia at the time. People were not even allowed to read or write anything in the Polish language. Her father lost his job as he was in favor of the Polish rule. Then, when Marie was just 10, her oldest sister, Zofia, became sick and died from the disease typhus. And 2 years later, her mother died from tuberculosis. This was a difficult time for the young Marie. She was a very bright child and did well in school. She had a sharp memory and worked hard on her studies, and at the age of 16, she won a gold medal on completion of her secondary education at the Russian Lycée. After graduating from high school, she wanted to attend a university. But this wasn't something that young women did in Poland in the 80s. However, there was a famous university in Paris called the Sorbonne University that women could attend. She did not have the money to go there, but agreed to work to help pay for her sister Bronislava to go to school in France, if she would help Marie after she graduated. In 1890, she started her scientific training in a chemical laboratory at the Museum of Industry and Agriculture. It took 6 long years for Bronislava to graduate and become a doctor. Marie moved to France and entered the Sorbonne. During the 6 years, Marie had read a lot of books on math and physics, and she knew she wanted to become a scientist. In 1891, Marie arrived in France and enrolled at the Sorbonne. She lived the life of a poor college student, but she loved every minute of it. She threw herself into her studies, but this dedication had a personal cost. With little money, Curie survived on just buttered bread and tea, and her health sometimes suffered because of her poor diet. Curie completed her master's degree in physics in 1893 and earned another degree in mathematics the following year with the help of a fellowship. She was a working student, studied in the morning hours and tutorials in the evening hours. In the spring of 1894, she met a French physicist, Pierre Curie, who was a professor in the School of Physics, and they married a year later and soon had their first child, a daughter named Irene. And in 1904, the couple had their second daughter named Eve. Fascinated with the work of a French physicist, Henri Becquerel, who discovered that uranium casts off rays weaker than the X-rays, she took his work a few steps further and she discovered radioactivity. Turning her attention to minerals, she found her interest drawn to pitchblende, a mineral whose activity superior to that of pure uranium could be explained only by the presence in the ore of small quantities of an unknown substance of very high activity. Then Pierre Curie joined in her work. One day, Marie was examining the mineral pitchblende. She expected there to be a few rays from the uranium in pitchblende, but instead she found a lot of rays. She soon realized that there must be a new undiscovered element in the pitchblende. Marie and her husband spent many hours in the science lab investigating pitchblende and the new element. They eventually figured out that there were 2 new elements in the pitchblende for the periodic table. Marie named one of the elements polonium after her homeland, Poland, and she named the other radium because it gave off such strong rays. The Curies came up with the term radioactivity to describe elements that emitted strong rays. In 1902, the Curies announced that they had produced a decigram of pure radium, demonstrating its existence as a unique chemical element. On the results of this research, Marie received her doctorate of science in June 1903, and with Pierre, she was awarded the Davy Medal of the Royal Society. In 1903, the Nobel Prize in Physics was awarded to Marie and Pierre Curie, as well as Henry Becquerel for their work in radiation. She became the first woman to be awarded the Nobel Prize. In December 1904, she was appointed chief assistant in the laboratory directed by Pierre Curie. She suffered a tremendous loss in 1906 when Pierre was killed in Paris after accidentally stepping in the front of a horse-drawn wagon. The sudden death of Pierre Curie was a bitter blow to Marie Curie, but it was also a decisive turning point in her career. Henceforth, she was to devote all her energy to completing alone the scientific work that they had undertaken. On May 13, 1906, she was appointed to the professorship that had been left vacant on her husband's death. She was the first woman to teach in the Sorbonne. In 1908, she became titular professor, and in 1910, her fundamental treatise on radioactivity was published. She also championed the development of X-rays after the death of her husband. In 1911, Marie won the Nobel Prize in Chemistry for discovering the two elements, polonium and radium. She was the first person to be awarded 2 Nobel Prizes, and she became very famous. Scientists came from around the world to study radioactivity from Marie. After the death of her husband, Curie joined with other famous scientists, including Albert Einstein and Max Planck, to attend the very first Solvay Congress in physics and discuss the many groundbreaking discoveries in their field. When World War I started, Marie devoted her time and resources to help the cause, and learned that doctors could use X-rays to help determine what was wrong with an injured soldier. However, there weren't enough X-ray machines for every hospital to have one. She came up with the idea that the X-ray machines could move from one hospital to another in a truck. She even helped to train people to run the machines. The trucks became known as Petites Curies, meaning little Curies, and are thought to have helped over 1 million soldiers during the war. Soon doctors also found that radiology could also help with curing cancer. In 1921, accompanied by her 2 daughters, Marie Curie made a triumphant journey to the United States, where President Warren Harding spoke at length, praising her great attainments in the realms of science and intellect, and saying she represented the best in womanhood. We lay at your feet the testimony of that love which all the generations of men have been wont to bestow upon the noble woman, the unselfish wife, the devoted mother. On May 15, 1922, Marie was made a member of the International Commission on Intellectual Cooperation by the Council of the League of Nations. In addition, she had the satisfaction of seeing the development of the Curie Foundation in Paris and the inauguration in 1932 of the Warsaw Radium Institute, of which her sister Bronislava became director. Also, her daughter, Irene Joliot-Curie, followed in her mother's footsteps, winning the Nobel Prize in Chemistry in 1935. Joliot-Curie shared the honor with her husband, Frederick Joliot, for their work on the synthesis of the new radioactive elements. Unfortunately, the Curies had no idea of the dangers inherent in exposure to radioactive elements. In fact, she was known to carry test tubes of radium around in the pocket of her lab coat. So, her many years working with radioactive materials took a drastic toll on her health. Marie died on 4th July 1934 in Savoy, France, due to aplastic anemia, a blood disease that often results from exposure to large amounts of radiation, both from her experiments and from her work with X-ray machines. Curie made many breakthroughs in her lifetime, remembered as a leading figure in science and a role model for women all over the world. She has received numerous posthumous honors. Several educational and research institutions and medical centers bear the Curie name, including the Curie Institute and Pierre and the Marie Curie University. In 1937, Eve Curie wrote the first of many biographies devoted to her famous mother, Madame Curie, which became a feature film a few years later. Her office and laboratory in the Curie Pavilion of the Radium Institute are preserved as a Curie Museum. Nothing in life is to be feared. It is only to be understood. Now is the time to understand more, so that we may fear less. Be less curious about people and more curious about ideas. Words of Marie Curie.